A startling diplomatic development has emerged from the recent Trump-Putin summit in Alaska, suggesting a potential, albeit highly controversial, pathway to ending the war in Ukraine. U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff announced that Russian President Vladimir Putin has agreed to allow the United States and its European allies to offer Ukraine Article 5-like security guarantees. This concession, hailed as game-changing by the Trump administration, would theoretically provide Ukraine with a collective defense promise similar to that enjoyed by NATO members, serving as a workaround to Russia's staunch opposition to Ukraine's formal entry into the alliance. However, this apparent breakthrough is fraught with ambiguity and comes with a significant contentious condition: a potential land swap that would require Ukraine to cede the entirety of its Donbas region to Russia. While Ukrainian and European leaders have cautiously welcomed the discussion of security guarantees, they remain skeptical, demanding concrete details on how such a mechanism would function in practice. The proposal leaves Ukraine at a perilous crossroads, weighing a vague promise of security against the tangible and painful loss of sovereign territory, all while the credibility of any Russian commitment remains profoundly in doubt. The centerpiece of the announcement from the Alaska summit is Russia's apparent consent to a security arrangement for Ukraine that mimics NATO's Article 5. Special U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff stated this was the first time we had ever heard the Russians agree to that, framing it as a major U.S. diplomatic victory. According to Witkoff, Russia also agreed to legislate a promise not to violate the sovereignty of other European nations. President Trump touted this as big progress on Russia, and Secretary of State Marco Rubio noted that it justified follow-up meetings with Ukrainian and European leaders. This development is significant because Russia's opposition to Ukraine's potential NATO membership has been a central pretext for its aggression, which it views as a defensive measure against the alliance's eastward expansion. An Article 5-like guarantee offered by a coalition of the willing outside the formal NATO structure is being presented as a creative solution to this impasse. However, the announcement was met with immediate questions and deep-seated skepticism. Critics and analysts point out that the value of any security guarantee is rooted in its credibility. NATO's Article 5 is potent not just because of the text, but because of the integrated military command, joint planning, and the political commitment of its 32 members. A hastily constructed non-NATO guarantee lacks this institutional backbone. Furthermore, Russia's history of breaking international agreements, including the Budapest Memorandum and the Minsk Accords, casts a long shadow over any new promises from the Kremlin. While the Trump administration celebrated the concession, Ukrainian and European leaders responded with a mix of cautious optimism and a firm demand for clarity. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called the U.S. willingness to support such guarantees historic, but immediately highlighted the lack of substance. There are no details how it will work, and what America's role will be, Europe's role will be, and what the EU can do, he stated, emphasizing that any guarantee must be practical and deliver real protection on land, sea, and in the air. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen echoed this, welcoming Trump's willingness to contribute but affirming that the EU and a coalition of the willing are ready to do its share. This signals a European desire not to be sidelined in a deal brokered between Washington and Moscow. European leaders are reportedly concerned that Trump may try to pressure Zelensky into accepting unfavorable terms and are traveling to Washington to present a united front. The fundamental questions remain unanswered. Trigger mechanism. What specific actions would trigger the collective defense clause? Enforcement. Who would participate in the military response? Would it require unanimity among the guarantors? Commitment level. Does Article 5 mean an automatic military response, or does it, like the actual Article 5, allow members to decide for themselves what action to take? Without answers, The guarantee risks being another toothless assurance like the 1994 Budapest Memorandum, which failed to protect Ukraine from aggression. The most alarming detail to emerge is that this security proposal is tied to a Russian demand for significant territorial concessions from Ukraine. Reports indicate that Putin's offer requires Kyiv to withdraw its forces from the entirety of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, collectively known as Donbas, in exchange for Russia freezing the front lines elsewhere. This would mean surrendering Ukrainian-controlled territory, including key defensive fortifications and mineral-rich lands, that has been defended at the cost of tens of thousands of lives. This condition is a non-starter for Kyiv. President Zelensky has repeatedly stated that ceding sovereign territory is unconstitutional and strategically untenable, as it would provide Russia with a springboard for future attacks. Polling shows that roughly 75% of Ukrainians oppose any formal land concessions to Russia. For many Ukrainians, such a deal would be seen not as peace, but as a betrayal and an act of surrender. The Trump administration eased pivot away from demanding a ceasefire to focusing on a broader peace deal involving land swaps is viewed as a capitulation to Putin's agenda. Related alternative paths, armed neutrality vs formal guarantees. This new proposal exists within a spectrum of security options that have been debated for Ukraine. The primary alternatives are full NATO membership and a model of armed neutrality. Full NATO membership. Ukraine joins the alliance and receives the full Article 5 guarantee. This is the most credible and robust security guarantee available. Proven deterrent against Russian aggression. However, this is a red line for Russia, likely prolonging the war. Some NATO members are hesitant to extend the commitment. Armed neutrality. Ukraine receives massive, long-term Western military and financial aid to become a self-sufficient porcupine capable of deterring any invasion, but with no formal security guarantees. It can avoid provoking Russia with formal alliances. Prevents damage to NATO's credibility from an unenforceable guarantee, but leaves Ukraine to fight alone if deterrence fails. Requires sustained, long-term Western commitment, which is not guaranteed. Many analysts argue that armed neutrality, while imperfect, is the least poor option. It focuses on building Ukraine's inherent defensive strength, a multi-layered territorial defense system, rather than relying on external promises that may not be honored when tested. The current proposal of a vague guarantee in exchange for land appears to offer the worst of both worlds, a non-credible promise in exchange for a permanent strategic loss. From this, it can be seen that the road to a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine is still bumpy. The announcement of a potential Article 5-like security guarantee for Ukraine has created a flurry of diplomatic activity, but it is more a reflection of the deep divisions and desperate search for an exit than a clear path to peace. For the Trump administration, it is a concession to be sold as a political win. For Russia, it appears to be a calculated maneuver to legitimize territorial gains through a lopsided deal. For Europe, it is a moment of risk that requires a united front to avoid a disastrous outcome brokered over their heads. For Ukraine, it is an existential dilemma. The offer forces a choice between clinging to the hope of a Western security umbrella, one that has so far failed to materialize in a concrete form, and surrendering sovereign land, which would be a constitutional, strategic, and moral catastrophe. Until the who, what, when, and how of this guarantee are defined, it remains little more than a diplomatic mirage. Relying on such a vague promise, especially when the price is the dismemberment of the country, is a gamble that Ukraine cannot afford to take. The focus must remain on strengthening Ukraine's own ability to defend itself, as that is the only guarantee that has proven reliable. What is your takes? Please comment below and subscribe to learn more details about the Russia-Ukraine ceasefire. Thank you for watching. See you next time.